Thank you. Welcome, and it's wonderful to see so many. Geraldine was an astonishingly private person, and I'm not entirely sure that she would have completely approved of this occasion. But I think the fact that all of you are here, in a sense, as we are, to pay tribute to her, she would be politely enthusiastic about it. I want just to start by talking about 6 little tiny, what I call snapshots about Geraldine's career. First of all, during the war, in the blackout, she and her mother, and sometimes her sister, walking from Old Windsor to the Theatre Royal in the High Street of Windsor, and going to the first night of all the productions there, where they could sit in the gallery at the Theatre Royal, 2 seats for 9p. When Geraldine was about 12, she had an elocution teacher. And the elocution teacher gave her a speech, it was rather surprising really, of Lady Macbeth, "Glamis thou art and Cawdor." And I remember her saying to me, because she, I think to all of us, in different ways, in these years when she wasn't, as it were, busy on the stage or on the television or on the radio, she was quite given to reminiscence. And one of the things I certainly remember her saying was that she read this speech, and although she couldn't absolutely tell you what every word of it meant, instinctively she knew what this was about. What a pity she never ever played it on the stage. When she was 14, she left school, and she and her best friend applied for a job at the Theatre Royal Windsor. They were taken on as not quite ASMs, but student ASMs. And Geraldine's first appearance on the stage was as an attendant to Hippolyta in a production of Midsummer Night's Dream. A few years later, when she was working as an ASM and a small part actor, a now almost forgotten film star called Nova Pilbeam was going round the reps with a series of roles, and she arrived and the company fitted in. Nova Pilbeam was going to play Catherine Morland in Northanger Abbey. Nova Pilbeam decided at the last minute she wasn't coming. Geraldine was given the part. And I remember John Moffat telling me that he was in this production, and he was a little surprised that the person who'd handed round the tea and biscuits at the beginning of the session also turned out to be playing the leading role. In 1951, transferring from a play that had been performed in Windsor into the West End, Geraldine was turned pretty much overnight into a star. The play was called Who Goes There, and the star in it was Nigel Patrick. Nigel Patrick was an astonishingly accomplished actor, but not a very generous one. And on the first night, the gallery first nighters sitting up there all shouted out to Nigel Patrick as he took his individual call, "Bring on the new girl!" And Geraldine had to have a call absolutely of her own. And to finish this little series of images of Geraldine, in 1955, deciding that what she really wanted to do was play Shakespeare and the classics, she had an audition with Tony Quayle and Glenn Byam Shaw at Stratford. They watched the audition, came down to the front of the stage afterwards and said, "Look, why don't you just carry on with what you do best? Shakespeare's not really for you. How astonishingly untrue that was. So here we have Alan Rickman, Delina Kidd, Michael Radcliffe, and myself, Richard Digby-Day, to talk about our dear friend. Alan, will you say something about when you first met Geraldine?
Well, I first met Geraldine in a kind of forelock tugging way, because she was the wife of Hugh Crutwell, who was my principal at RADA. And so she was, as I described her once before, a vapor in the corridors, this famous woman who we didn't really get to know, and she came to see us in finals productions. And then, you know, time goes on and you find yourself on a TV set with her doing Barchester Chronicles, and then we worked on film and theatre together. And I suppose the thing I remember about her is also a kind of continuing learning process from her. She always felt like a teacher to me, and it was learning the divide between her person, what she was as a person, and what she was as an actress. Because as a person, she was endlessly curious and never talking about herself and always wanting to know what you were doing. As an actress, ferociously focused.
Absolutely.
So, totally becoming the character she was, so that even if she was playing a one-eyed madwoman in Prince of Thieves, that was somebody you weren't going to get into trouble with.
Delina, your memory of her goes right back to Who Goes There,
yes,
does it?
I didn't know her then, but I went to see Who Goes There. 1951 it was, and I looked it up. She was only 19, and it was the most astonishing debut in the theatre. She looked like a beautiful little elfin child, you know. She was just so perfect and beautiful. And then, of course, she opened her mouth and this astonishing voice came out. It was the most amazing voice, husky kind of voice with so many layers of meaning in it. So much, there was always some kind of innuendo, I mean, in a perfectly innocent way. But the voice was astonishing, and I think that's the great success of her early comedy, was the fact that the huge contrast between the look of her and the sound of this amazing voice. I don't think any director could have ever had to say to her, we want a little more vocal variety, because she had it in spades. It was wonderful.
Michael, you were in that curious position of reviewing her and yet eventually getting to know her very well.
Well, what was interesting was that I never actually reviewed her, because when I was theatre critic of the Observer for 6 years in the 1980s, and during that time it so happened that I never actually came to review anything by her. I think she was doing a lot of television then, but I had seen virtually everything she'd done from about 1962, and Delina just mentioned her innocence, but this was an innocence that was sharply shot with mischief.
Sure.
Always. And the first time I saw that was she did a play called Everything in the Garden by Giles Cooper in 1962, in which she played a very demure suburban housewife who was short of cash, so went on the game without telling her husband about preserving a totally immaculate life in the lounge and the kitchen and everything. And she put all her money in a little vase on the mantelpiece. And that's my first image of Geraldine. And I think we all probably have particular images of Geraldine. She's a very, very visual actor. And that's my first one, the way she used to just come and put this money on the mantelpiece. And I think the husband found out in the end.
Yes, he does.
I'm sure you know. That was my first, and this was very anarchic. It was very beautiful, but totally anarchic and very Geraldine.
I first saw her in 1956 when I was a schoolboy, and I'd gone to stay in Cardiff, and there was a production of a play by a very fashionable writer, now completely forgotten, Italian writer called Ugo Betti, of a play called Summertime, directed by Peter Hall, and it starred Dirk Bogarde in one of his last stage performances, and Geraldine and Gwen Franken Davis. and it was directed by Peter Hall, and it was Peter Hall who insisted that Geraldine came the following year to Stratford-upon-Avon to play the princess in Love's Labour's Lost. She said something very funny about that production, and a fellow cast member. Alan Bedell was a wonderful actor, but he was not wonderful to actually be with as a member of the company. And Geraldine said, on the first night, as they were walking upstage after one of her very commanding and difficult speeches, they're walking up and he says, "You're trying too hard." She did eventually forgive him, I think. We've talked a little now. Let's look at Geraldine in action. This is the last thing she ever did at the National, in a play she played twice in at the National, The Way of the World. Here she is in 1995, in, I'm afraid to say, not a very good recording of her as Lady Wishfort.
Is Sir Rowland coming, sayest thou, Fiver? And are things in order?
Yes, madam. I've put wax lights in the sconces and placed the footmen in a row by the door in their best liveries, with the coachman and the postilion to fill up the equipage.
Have you foul-billed the coachman and the postilion, that they may not stink of the stable when Sir Rowland comes by?
Yes, madam.
And is the music ready, that he may be entertained in all points with correspondence to his passions?
All is ready, madam.
Well, and... Right, and how do I look for you?
Most killing well, madam.
Well, and how shall I receive him? In what figure shall I give his heart the first impression? There is a great deal in the first impression. Shall I sit? No, I won't sit. I'll walk. I'll go from the door upon his entrance and then turn for upon him. That'll be too sudden. I'll lie. I'll lie down. I'll receive him in my little dressing room. There's a couch. Yes, I'll make the first impression on a couch. I won't lie neither. Long, and lean upon one elbow with one foot a little dangling on, jogging in a thoughtful way. As soon as he appears, stop. I stop and be surprised and rise to meet him in a pretty disorder. Yes, nothing is more alluring than a levy from a couch in some confusion. Choose the foot to advantage and furnishes with blushes and recomposing airs beyond comparison. Come, there's a cooch.
Geraldine never formally taught, but I remember her saying that if she was to teach, she would like to teach Restoration comedy, which so often she believed was somehow got wrong. And one of the things she said that was the most important thing about it was the punctuation, particularly the use of the dashes that appear in Congreve's scripts. It's a pity that she didn't teach, but she did pass on so much of what she knew to the younger people that she worked with. Alan, will you say something about those particularly two astonishing appearances you made together in completely contrasting things? First of all, the Barchester Chronicles, where you were a pair of monstres sacrés, and then perhaps something about the sheer outrage that was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Well, there was a long time between the two of them.
Yes.
And I was very much the new boy on the set, and made to feel like it too at the time. But Geraldine was incredibly supportive. But as I say, the main thing was getting her expression of disdain every minute of the set, of the shoot that we were on was unmistakable. And I rode on that, really, because you're doing a TV series, you don't have time to talk, you're rehearsing, and to come in the morning and to get that little tilted nose up in your face the whole time was huge gold to me. I knew her a lot better when we did Prince of Thieves. But then again, as what I was saying, she was there with one eye blacked out. And but although we might be laughing off the set, on set, absolutely dead serious. She was remarkable.
It's a pity that she didn't make more films. I think when I think of her film career, the one that seems to me to be the most astonishing by far is The Magdalene Sisters, in which she gives a performance of kind of ferocity and irony, marvellously combined. Geraldine had an absolutely wonderful sense of irony, which is so important for actors, particularly in the classics.
Well, she had absolute discipline and absolute freedom, and it's, you know, as time goes on, you learn that the two things are the same side of a coin.
What struck me, I think, was the passion which she brought even to these most malignant figures that she played. Sister Bridget in that film, and also the mother in Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, and indeed to Alice in Dance of Death with Olivier at the Old Vic in the early days of the National. These were tormented women, really, but she sort of gave them a certain respect, and particularly I was looking at clips from Oranges before we did this, and she really clearly, you know, went so inside this monstrous mother character, this evangelical mother, that she could understand that the woman really truly believed what she was saying. And she did the same with Mrs. Malaprop, which I think is probably, and I think Delina agrees with me, probably the greatest performance we ever saw Geraldine give.
Yes, I thought so.
And that was in this building, in the Olivier. And what she understood about Mrs. Malaprop, and she explained this in a very rare interview that she gave to Plays and Players, was that Mrs. Malaprop believed that she was right. And she was a woman who was very curious about language. She really wanted to find the right word, and that she had investigated and gone into all this and was perfectly convinced that she had come up with the right word. And Geraldine said, and that was what made it so funny, because it was so real, it was funnier than the normal sort of grotesque performance of Mrs. Malaprop that we were all brought up on. And it had a deep humanity to it, and she and Michael Hordern together just made the most marvellous music together. He was like a cello and she was going on like a demented violin, and they would anyone who saw them would never forget it. But she believed in the characters she was playing, even if they were monsters.
Delina, you got to know Geraldine very well in the sort of last decade of her life, through that very popular thing, the book club, didn't you? And Geraldine loved reading.
She did. She invited us to dinner one night, and I was telling her about the book club that I joined. I see some of them are here tonight. It's run by Sheila Hancock, your friend, and Julie Legrand. And I was telling her about this, and she said, "Oh, do you think I could join?" And I said, "Yes, of course, Geraldine." And of course, they were thrilled, everybody, and she joined. So for about the next 5 or 6 years, we had marvellous times driving but we meet about every 6 weeks or so, driving to all these different venues, different people's houses to discuss books. And several times she entertained us in her she had the most beautiful flat looking over the Thames. I mean, we all know she had wonderful taste as an actress, but also for the way she lived, all the way her big room was arranged was absolutely marvellously stylish, slightly sort of offbeat, but wonderfully stylish. And I thought she was just she had such wonderful taste. And also in the way she dressed, you know, she always, right up to the end, I used to say to her, "You look like Peter Pan." You felt she'd just flown in through the window, and these wonderful, marvellous clothes she had.
I think many people don't actually realise that these last years of Geraldine's life, when she basically decided no longer to continue with Miss Marple, that they gave her a complete new, as it were, lease on things. Suddenly, for the first time in her life, really, since she'd been at Windsor when she was 14 to when she gave up Miss Marple, she'd been working continuously. And a supportive mother and a supportive wife. And now she could actually do what she wanted to do. There were never any feelings, were there, of regret that she wasn't working at all. She
we kept sort of saying, why don't you do this, and wouldn't that be a good idea? Yes, I'll think about that, I'll read it, and then it would always, no, you never heard about it again. But she loved, my partner Howard and I got to know her really after Hugh died. And first came in contact with her because Howard had your Jane Austen show, and she gave a performance of that in Stratford for one of his groups, and that's gradually how we got to know her. But I, of course, was a critic, and so there was always that slight careful, piano. Let's take this very slowly. But and I think Hugh particularly felt that probably. But when after Hugh had gone, and she had a long time looking after Hugh as he was ailing, we became slowly very good friends, and we took her to the theatre a lot. We took her to the cinema a lot. She brought to both those things a wonderful adventurousness. She never wanted to do the obvious thing, except the obvious thing was sometimes not obvious for her. We took her to see Ghosts at the Almeida, and she'd never seen it or read it.
Really?
And one got surprises like that.
Another part she should have played.
Another part she should certainly have played. And we're at the back here, we've just been talking about all the parts that Geraldine should have played. Cleopatra, obviously, Lady Macbeth, etc., etc. Every single part was completely different, and she would have been wonderful in all of them. The versatility was extraordinary, wasn't it?
It was fun going to the theatre with her. I went particularly actually to concerts and opera and ballet with her. And she developed a very, very strong taste for Mahler and Wagner. The last thing we ever went to was a superb performance of Mahler's Third Symphony, and she turned to me at the end and she said, I think that is the most wonderful music I have ever heard. Unforgettable. Sometimes if you were with her in the theatre, it wasn't altogether easy. I remember going with Delina and Delina's husband, Gary Raymond, and I to a play that shall be nameless, but if I tell you, it began as a calendar and then became a film and then became a play. I've never forgotten, after it'd been on about 20 minutes, Geraldine turning to me and going, I think this is the worst experience I have ever had.
But this, what you're saying, what she's often said to me, this is the most wonderful time of my life, which is marvellous, because often when people are old, they feel lonely, and that's not at all, because she went out such a lot with you. And of course, also, I must say, she was absolutely devoted to her family, to Claudia and Greg and the children. She was a wonderful grandmother, was she not? You're all here tonight, aren't you? She, she really loved being with her family too.
And she had a great, profound feeling for the National Theatre, and she loved coming in this building. Even just to see things, just coming in to the Littleton Cafe. We always met her in the Littleton Cafe, and she was very good at looking invisible in the Littleton Cafe, because the Littleton Cafe was always full of Marple fans, by the dozens of Marple fans, and obviously she enjoyed many things about Marple, but it was a great burden in the end, because it was such hard work at that age. So you would come into the door of the Littleton Cafe and try and find Geraldine with this tiny figure, because she was quite small, really, and usually wearing varieties of black or grey, beautiful, rather Japanese clothes, yes. And it took some time to find Martin. She'd be sitting there like this, you know. But occasionally there would be very determined Marple people who would come and talk to her, and of course she was very sweet with them. But no, she just felt very strongly about her link and her whole history with this theatre, going back to Olivier. We haven't mentioned Olivier.
No,
but Olivier was so important to her. And
Olivier absolutely trusted Geraldine, and in turn, Geraldine absolutely trusted him. When he said to her, I think we'll do the Dance of Death, and you'll play Alice, and I'll play the captain, she was slightly worried, and then he said, you play comedy. If you can play comedy, you can play anything. And one of the wonderful things about the Dance of Death in the performance given by Olivier and Geraldine, both parts, normally only the first part is done, is the fact that it's bleakly and sickly funny, as well as an entirely terrifying picture of a marriage where two people are locked into it in hatred rather than love. We'll now look at a bit of the film that was made of the Dance of Death with Sir Lawrence, Geraldine and Robert Lang.
Everywhere. One can hardly breathe. Edgar? Edgar? Alice? Alice?
What is it?
I don't know. Look at him.
That happens sometimes. I'll play to him.
No, Alice, stop. You take it so calmly. What is going on here?
Ask him there.
Him there? Why, that's your husband.
To me, he is a stranger, just as he was 25 years ago.
Must go and inspect the sentries. Is he ill?
I don't know.
Is he insane?
I don't know.
Does he drink?
More boasting about it than drinking, as a rule. 25 years I have lived in this fortress captive, like the prisoners used to be in the dungeons below here, guarded by a man I have always hated, whom I now hate so utterly that the day he died I should laugh aloud.
Why did you never separate?
You may well ask. There hasn't been a day that we haven't wanted to, but we are welded together and can't get free. For 5 years we hardly spoke to each other, now only death can part us.
Why are you both so lonely?
Because he isolates me. First of all, he uprooted my brother and sisters. Uprooting is his own word for it. Then my friends.
But his relations? You have uprooted them?
Yes. For after destroying my reputation, they almost destroyed me. In the end, my only communication with the outside world was that telegraph there. You see, the telephone girls used to spy on us. I taught myself how to use it. Don't tell him that, or he'll kill me.
When Geraldine was at the National playing this whole series of leading roles. Frank Dunlop was the administrative director, and he worked with her. He sent me this email last night from New York, where he now lives. My heart still breaks when I think of lovely Geraldine. She was one of the best things that happened in my life, a real company member. And even in the 3 plays we did together in Larry's time, Edward II, Home and Beauty, and The White Devil showed the most astonishing range that no other actor I know could better. It's a very moving tribute. Being at the National, as has been said, really mattered to Geraldine, and of course it gave her a whole series of opportunities that, had she, as it were, stayed in the commercial theatre, might never have been open to her. The range was fantastic, and of course the thing that we forget is not only were they doing it at the Old Vic, they were also on tour. I remember her telling me that some weeks she'd be playing Home and Beauty on Monday and Tuesday, and at the end of the week she'd be in Bradford doing The Dance of Death. All that now seems unimaginable to us, because it just doesn't happen like that anymore. I want to tell you very briefly a story that she told me about Loot. How we wish we could have seen her. Did any of you see her in Loot?
Yes, I saw her in Loot, yes.
At the Golders Green Hippodrome.
Lucky you. There was an enormous amount of trouble during the production about the play itself. It had Kenneth Williams in it, and it had the Scottish actor Duncan McRae in it, and it had Geraldine. Well, the play got eventually to Oxford, and rewrites were coming, and Geraldine said that she felt she'd had enough. And one day, she absolutely said, "That's it, I'm leaving." It was about 11 o'clock in the morning, and she walked out of the new theatre, started walking down St. Giles, and then she realised she'd left her handbag behind. So she said, well, honestly, possibly it's easier to stay. But Kenneth Williams, of course, was always trying to make her laugh, and several times did. Is there anything any of you want to say more?
Oh, I wanted to say about the 50 years celebration here at the National Theatre. She asked my husband to take her, and I was there as well. And afterwards, there was a huge party. I mean, the entire audience of the Olivia Theatre were down in the bar downstairs, and there was just an enormous circle around Geraldine. Everybody in the building wanted to come and talk to her, not just the actors, stage managers, technicians, her dresser, all sorts of people who'd known her over the years, and very sweet. In the car going home, she said, "I think that's the most wonderful party I've ever been to."
Yes, I think I'd just like to say here in this building that, and having looked through a lot of pictures preparing for today, and looking at a lot of clips, I think she is really a really important person in the history of the second half of the 20th century. And I think she was contemporary and growing up with Judi Dench, with Maggie Smith and Vanessa Redgrave, whom we thought of as the great trio who grew up together, or my generation did anyway. But Geraldine was absolutely on their level, and I don't actually think she's ever been given credit for that. I think she's a major, major figure, and indeed a lot of the obituaries did say that, because she had by that time, of course, been smothered by Marple, and she said she knew what the papers would say when she died. They would say, "TV's Miss Marple dies, 82. And that's exactly what happened to the very letter, wasn't it? All the headlines said that.
Yes. But it isn't what she wanted, but it's what inevitably happened.
She was philosophical.
It was a shock to know that she was 83 when she died,
Yes.
because she was the youngest person I knew.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, what a wonderful thing, and that's so true. I'd known Geraldine very well since 1972, and we kept on looking for something that we could work on together, and finally decided we would make a one-person performance based on the novels of Jane Austen. which opened when I was running Nottingham Playhouse. We worked on it for over 2 years. And then it opened, and you're going to hear a bit of it right at the end, but I'll just say that we decided we'd have a tryout of it. There were no previews, it was just going to open cold in Nottingham on the Monday night, so we thought we'd better try it out somewhere. So we went to a little theatre near Newark-on-Trent to try it out in front of an invited audience, where Geraldine managed to knock 20 minutes off the running time because she was so nervous about the actual idea, for the first time in her life, in being on stage by herself. I do just want to say that working with Geraldine on text, and text for all of us is so important, was one of the greatest experiences of my whole life. That her response to detail in text, there's only one other actor, and I'll say who it was, Eileen Atkins, who in my mind was able to achieve that degree of detail when I'm working with them. It was phenomenal, and it all seemed so easy. But it was such hard work that she was prepared to do. We will end by playing Geraldine reading a letter that Jane Austen wrote to the Prince Regent's librarian, James Stanier Clark, when he offered some suggestions as to the sort of novel Jane Austen ought to be writing.
Chawton, 1816, to the Reverend James Stanier Clark, Librarian to His Royal Highness the Prince Regent. My dear sir, you are very kind in your hints as to the sort of composition which might recommend me at present, and I am fully sensible that an historical romance founded on the house of Saxe-Coburg might be much more to the purpose of profit or popularity than such pictures of domestic life in country villages as I deal in. But I could no more write a romance than an epic poem. I could not sit seriously down to write a serious romance under any other motive than to save my life, and if it were indispensable for me to keep it up and never relax into laughing at myself and other people, I am sure I should be hung before I had finished the first chapter. No, I must keep to my own style and go on in my own way, and though I may never succeed again in that, I am convinced that I should totally fail in any other. I remain, my dear sir, your very much obliged and very sincere friend, Jane Austen.
Geraldine McKeown, great actress, wonderful person. Let's give her a round of applause.